One of the reasons Joe Rogan's podcast is so popular, I think, is that he's asking questions that all of us are asking. In this conversation with Diana Walsh Pasulka, he's really asking the question of ascendancy or transcendency. Is there a way up and out of our current situation, out of the kind of chaotic and dark world that is in front of us? And if ascendancy is possible, if transcendency is possible, how? So I'm glad you're with me. Let's get into it.
When I did American Cosmic, which was the first book about UFOs, again, which I never thought I'd be studying, I encountered this man, Tyler, and he works for the Space Force, and he's been working for the Space Force since the whole space shuttle program. Okay, and he's a special kind of person. He's a mission controller, but he does a lot of other things too. But he's also a multimillionaire space rocket scientist. I mean, just so strange. And I called him Tyler after the character in Fight Club because that's who he reminded me of. He reminded me of that character.
So they're talking about Plato's philosopher Fight Club and the fact that wrestling played this role in the Greek culture and their ability to do philosophy at a high level. So that's going to be important as we move forward because this conversation goes into an interesting place.
Because he had this, first of all, he has more than 44 patents, and they're all related to space. And the Space Force has a special place for him, like he's special, right? What I found was that he was practicing these types of protocols. I call them protocols because they reminded me of Plato and monastic traditions, the traditions of monks and things.
So it's important to remember her use of the word protocols and that she connects it to a monastic tradition, the tradition of monks. Now, she's a Catholic person, and so within Christian history, there's always been this monastic tradition, the tradition of the Desert Fathers, people going out and practicing spiritual disciplines. So she's going to use the word protocols. I'm going to kind of borrow that idea and actually tie it to the idea of spiritual disciplines as the conversation kind of unfolds.
So he would make sure that he got sunshine. He would make sure that he got plenty of sleep. He would not have too much caffeine. He exercised a lot. He boxed, right? So he was also a fighter. And he tried to stay away from people. I know it sounds weird, but that's what monks do. They try to stay, they try to like monitor their input of people because those people can actually take them off their game or something like that. But so this guy was put into another mental state. And during this mental state, he said that he could receive calculations, he could receive information, he could receive things, and then he could gather a group of scientists, and he wouldn't tell them where he came from because he honestly thought they were coming from these things outside of space-time, kind of like ETs or something, off-planet intelligences.
Which Tesla also believed.
And the people who started our own Space Force believed it. So this isn't common knowledge. That's what I found, is like a lot of people they don't know this history of the American Space Force and the Russian Space Force. Very much the same. These people were doing these things. And this allowed them, you see this in sports, right? So I was just using this example in a class yesterday. I saw this basketball game 2 or 3 years ago with Steph Curry. And, the way they were playing, it was almost as if there was an emergent phenomena that was bigger than each of the people because they somehow anticipated what the other guy was going to do. And I used to do sports, and I know that this is something that can be done. There's a flow state, right? And I think that this is what Plato was trying to get his group into.
What's interesting about the idea of a flow state and sports and this emergent phenomenon that she's talking about is that the same thing happens in dialogue. And it actually happens here in just a second, and I don't know that they picked up on it, but there's this Dai-logos, this living or moving word that happens between two people as we exchange ideas, as we use words, but it's also tied to the idea, at least in sort of Christian cosmology, when God created Adam, he breathed into Adam. He gave spirit to Adam. And so he became an embodied spirit. And so the breath, words are always tied to this idea of spirit because like in the ancient world, things that move were thought to be alive. That's why they would refer to the stars as almost like spirits or angelic beings. Why? Because it seems like the stars move. Things that move have spirit. And so the Dai-logos, the moving word, it is also a type of emergent phenomenon, and maybe even sort of like pointing us towards this idea of transcendence that they're going to get to.
Well, that makes sense. And one of the things that happens in flow state is that you stop being there.
That's right.
Yeah, it's not you.
Yeah.
And you're just experiencing this thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. You experience it on stage doing stand-up.
I imagine
when you
that.
do it right.
Yeah.
When you get it right, you're on a ride. Like you're just like sort of like making sure that, okay, feed this into the machine and go. And it goes. And you're sort of like you're in tune with what you're saying, but you're almost outside of yourself.
Well, it's interesting too because a comedian has a crowd. He's in a sense doing that Dai-logos in a way. The crowd's not necessarily speaking back, but the crowd is giving sort of communication. Maybe it's nonverbal communication, but maybe it's laughter. Maybe it's whatever type of feedback the comedian gets. And Joe has talked about how a lot of comedians work out their material in front of a crowd. They just do it. And as they do it, the material gets better, because they've received that feedback from the crowd. And this, again, is why I think Joe Rogan's podcast has such a wide appeal. Joe is a mixed martial artist, so he understands the wrestling side of thing, the Philosopher Fight Club side of thing. He's a comedian, so he understands comedy, but part of comedy is, in a way, story and narrative is a part of that. And again, we're sort of looking back into ancient times with Socrates and Plato, like the poets, were the ones who won the crowd. And the philosophers were the ones who spoke to individuals, and so the idea is how could you do both? And I think Plato actually is the one who achieves that. I think he is a poet philosopher because he's writing story. Socrates is his character. Now I think Socrates is a good philosopher and a real person and all that. But Plato very much makes him a character in a narrative. And by doing that, he is doing both poetry and philosophy. And that's a powerful thing. I want to talk about that more as this conversation continues to go into the area of like, what is it to be transcendent? What is this transcendent phenomenon that's going on? So again, we sort of look at these conversations that are happening with Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and elsewhere because in a way they're a barometer for what's happening in culture. This desire for story, desire for dialogue is reemerging. And she was talking about how those monks kind of limit their interaction with people. And today we are inundated with interactions, digital interactions from people we never invited into our world. And what kind of influence are those people having on you, having on me? And this is where Paul Vanderklay and the sort of TLC digital community, whatever you want to call it, it's just really fascinating to look at that as an emergent phenomenon. And they'll get to Plato's cave here in a second, so maybe I don't want to ruin too much of that, but yeah.
That's exactly right. And there is science that shows that this is the case.
Right, with brainwaves.
Yeah, the problem is that they're like when Joe's out there on stage, they're not going to hook you up to an MRI, right? They can't do that kind of, because when it's happening spontaneously. It just happens, and no one can actually predict when it's going to happen. But you hope that it happens.
Yeah, so what is the thing, and why is it that when you go looking for it, you can't find it? I think it's because it's a clue to something greater than itself, and we'll get to that again.
Also, if they did hook you up to it, you would also be aware that you're being monitored and it would change the state.
And you'd lose it. Yeah, you'd lose it.
Yeah. It's like when you're in a lucid dream, and you go, oh my God, I'm in a lucid dream, and then wake up.
Yeah.
Damn it. I've had that happen so many times. like, wow, I know there's a way to facilitate lucid dreams. I know there's a study behind it, but I've never, for whatever reason, it seems so stupid that I've never done it, but I've never even had the desire to do it. I just want it to come to me when it comes to me, which is dumb.
Not necessarily. I respect that.
Yeah, but a part of me doesn't. Part of me is like, you're just lazy. Why don't you just like go like start the practice and study it and figure out how to make it happen more often, you know? But for whatever reason, I have zero desire to do that. I don't know why.
There might be some wisdom there.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So anybody that follows Joe Rogan, you know that he's into psychedelics. You know that he's into this stuff. And it's interesting that Diana kind of gives him this, maybe there's some wisdom to that. Now, Joe did say, look into it and study it. And I think that I think the wisdom is, if you don't know what the door is and you don't know how to shut it, don't open it. Don't open a door that you're not powerful enough to shut, because you're sort of meddling in things that are beyond you. And I do think that this is under, I think, the larger sort of struggle that's going on in culture today, where these transhumanists, trying to elevate humanity into this godlike state. You can go back and look at the transhumanist podcast that we did, but Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park was, you're so busy asking the question what you can do that you've stopped asking the question what should you do. And you could go to C.S. Lewis's Ransom trilogy, and at the very end, they're calling the spirits macrobes, because we know what a microbe is. We can see that under a microscope. But these macrobes, these higher life forms, these higher biologics, that's the term we're using today. And is that all it is? Is it just a macrobe? And so wisdom there, and this is where, again, from a Christian worldview, I go back to the authoritative Word of God, because it is revelation. It's not something that we as humanity try to figure out on our own. It's revealed to us from the Creator. He has all knowledge and all wisdom. Learn from that. That's the best source of truth that we have.
In Tibet, there's a Tibetan dream yoga. Ooh. And that's what they do. They basically teach you how to do, and you have to have a teacher, by the way, because they say it can be dangerous. So I think that's probably why you think you're not doing it, because I don't think you're lazy, frankly. Like, I know the kinds of things you do. I know that that's not part. So,
yeah, but I am lazy. That's what's crazy.
Well,
I really am. I'm lazy, but I'm disciplined.
Okay.
I'm both of those things. Like, I do all the things that I'm supposed to do, but God, it's a sludge. It's a struggle. It's like, ugh. But I always do them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's that. You'd be up for Plato's. He'd invite you to his school.
The only time things are not a struggle is when, like when I was competing. When I was competing, then my discipline wasn't a struggle. Then it was an obsession. So it was like, people would say, God, he's so disciplined. Like, no, I'm mentally ill. I'm crazy.
Yeah, I understand that.
There's a giant difference between discipline. Like Mike Tyson said this on the podcast. He said, discipline is doing something you hate, but doing it like you love it.
This will take us back to the monastic tradition. Discipline for the sake of loving something, for the sake of worship. That, to me, is potentially a clue as to where Joe is in his life, but maybe even a clue as to where we are as a society. There's a reason that Islam is increasing in Western culture, because it's rigid, it's law, it's obedience. And particularly in the West, we have lost the virtue of discipline, which I guess technically isn't a virtue, but you can think of temperance, you can think of courage, you can think of those virtues that would allow you to pursue a disciplined life of holiness, or a disciplined pursuit of holiness. Why? Because you're obsessed by it. That's Joe's thing, right? But these monks, they did it because they loved it. They did it because they loved the thing itself that they were pursuing. Now, I say thing, and I have to sort of correct myself there, which is they did it for the love of the person of God and the pursuit of that person and the pursuit of holy worship. And isn't that really the transcendence that we are looking for? Isn't that really the transcendence that we're searching? So again, interesting take there from Joe. I don't do it because I am disciplined. I do it because I'm obsessed by a thing. You sort of get not possessed, but something grabs a hold of you, and you pursue that thing until you feel like you have it mastered. This is Jordan Peterson, We Who Wrestle with God, is coming out. We don't really want to. We pursue God. We pursue everything else in life until we feel that we have it mastered. We pursue God not to master God, but to be mastered by God. So I heard this on this podcast, John Mark Comer, on the crisis of discipleship. Applicable, maybe? Paul Vanderklay showed this to me, so shout out to Paul.
Father Macarius, do you still wrestle with the devil? And Father Macarius says, no, I have grown too old and he has grown old with me. Then he says, I wrestle with God. And the young man says, you wrestle with God and you hope to win. And he says, no, I hope to lose.
That's the idea. We wrestle with God and we hope to lose. And the disciplined life of holiness, the disciplined pursuit of holiness, in every other aspect of our lives, we want to master the thing. Comedy, music, education, whatever subject it is. But when it comes to theology, we pursue it because we love the thing itself and we want the thing, and I keep saying the thing, but the person of God to grab hold of us. And what does it mean to be mastered by God? What does it mean to be, if you're wrestling with God and God is the one who has you pinned down? What does that mean? That means everything in your life now becomes an act of worship. That means God is the highest good. That means we have, this is so good, like our will is submitted to God's will. This is Psalm 37:4. I think often maybe misunderstood, but it's delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. This idea of God giving you the desires of your heart doesn't mean that God is going to give you everything you want in life. What it actually means is your desire will arrive. Now, maybe that's new desires, or maybe that's the thing that you desire most, which is the Lord. To know God, to be known by God, to have God apprehend you, to be mastered by your master, to be mastered by the creator of the universe, to come into harmony with his will is the thing that we delight in the most. It is the desire of our heart. Can you get this by looking for it? Can I get my desire by looking for my desire? No, I have to look for the Lord. In pursuit of the Lord, then I have the desire. C.S. Lewis said, in religion as in war and everything else, comfort is the one thing you cannot get by looking for it. If you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will get neither comfort nor truth, only soft soap and wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, despair. That's comedy. That's irony right there. But it's so true.
That's right.
Yeah. So when you love it, it's not really discipline.
No, it's not.
It's obsession.
And
the difference between discipline, like Mike Tyson said this on the podcast. He said, discipline is doing something you hate, but doing it like you love it.
That's right.
Yeah. So when you love it, it's not really discipline.
No, it's not.
It's obsession.
And
there's a different thing to that.
That's what I was telling you about when I saw your picture out there of Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, I was an artist. I really liked to do art. And I remember the first time I became obsessed was when I was doing this drawing of Jimi Hendrix. And I went on, it went on for about a week. And my parents were like, "What are you doing?" You know, and I was just obsessed with getting it correct. It had to be absolutely correct. And I did get it correct, and it was pretty amazing.
The reason why this podcast is called the Joe Rogan Experience is because I think Jimi Hendrix is a religious figure.
He is.
This guy had transcended the normal boundaries of what music was and had tapped into something, whatever it was. But when you listen to Voodoo Child, to this day, I've listened to that song thousands of times. But like if I'm on my way to go do something cool and I listen to that song like loud in my car, it's just like he tapped into something that was just out of this realm, inaccessible to the average person that plays a guitar.
And is the risk from, again, sort of speaking from my Christian worldview, is the risk in many Christian circles to say the thing that Hendrix was tapping into was not the Spirit of God, but some other spirit, you know, and we need to be careful of that. And wisdom would say, yeah, again, don't open a door you can't close. Or was Hendrix created for a purpose? Was there common grace? Was there general revelation? Was there something that Hendrix was tapping into that was part of his creation? The Bible says that we are God's workmanship, created for good works, that God is sort of preordained beforehand. And, you know, Pasulka she's a Catholic, you know, but she does not push back on this. And I think that there's something to that. Now, you could get into the nuance and you could get into the ideology behind some of Hendrix's music. And in some ways, you know, by doing that, we could have a good, very sort of practical, propositional conversation about whether or not Hendrix's music is good or bad, you know, air quotes there. But again, isn't that us trying to look at the thing and now we're not seeing the thing for what it is? We're not seeing the thing itself. And if there's a transcendency to his music, isn't that a clue that transcendence is out there, that it's possible? I would rather go pursue that line of thinking rather than sort of the combative, which camp is he in? You know, which spirit inspired his music?
He hit some crazy vibration. And I've always got that feeling when I listen to his stuff. It's always like moved me in a very weird way where I'm just completely captivated, like immersed in the sounds, immersed in his music.
Me too. So he knew that he was doing that. So he, as you know, I'm sure you know this, but you know, he had a guitar when he was 5, and he was so good at it. He was immediately like he streamed sacred information through his music, and he knew he did. He called it his electric church.
So this is so funny because, again, my thing is that, you know, God has made us for a purpose. That purpose is to glorify him, enjoy him forever. But it's also interesting that God has, in a sense, made us into instruments. We can sing, our body, our actual physical body becomes an instrument when we sing. And there's something to music that is part of humanity, part of what makes us who we are. And I always think of obedience to God as harmony. That when we're disobedient, we're not in harmony with God anymore. And if you've ever played music, if you've ever had a group of people that you play music with, and you can kind of jam and you can kind of feel each other and anticipate each other, and there's improvisation that goes into it, you know, there's skill that goes into it, there's discipline that goes into it, and there is a sense in which music helps us, and again, points us the way towards that which is the ultimate good, which is to glorify God. And I think it's so interesting that happens, the best way that happens is in community, is when you are in a community of worshipers and you're all worshiping, and even if you're having a shitty day, the people around you carry you into that worship. The community supports you. Your friends and family members support you, and you go, okay, yeah, I can get over myself. And in a way, isn't that the Dai-logos? Again, this is what Joe and Diana are doing. They're sort of engaged in this. Sorry, the lighting in my room just changed. I've got some sunshine coming. Okay, sorry. This is going to be super distracting, but it just hit me that a bunch of light came in from the window near me, which threw off the camera. And so I went and I shut the blinds over there so that the camera could pick up the light in front of me better. And we're about to go into the conversation of Plato's cave. We are about to go. And what were we talking about? We were talking about worship. We were talking about the thing that ascends us out of the cave, out of this world, and the community. This is so funny. The community of people that build you up and support you in that disciplined pursuit of holiness that truly we cannot achieve on our own. We can't escape the cave on our own. We'll get to the cave, but I just thought it was so funny that a really bright beam of light came into my room, my cave. And I had to stop what I was saying to sort of block out the light, which is what we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be blocking out the light. But that's the light. That literally is the light coming into the cave. The light that's coming into the cave, it's the person of Jesus who makes worship possible, who makes harmony with the Creator possible. So I'm anticipating this dialogue. I'm anticipating this conversation a little bit because we'll get into the cave, but think about this also. This is so funny because I don't know if Joe and Diana are even aware of this. I haven't watched the end of this podcast yet, but they were just talking about the Philosopher Fight Club, Plato's Philosopher Fight Club, which involves wrestling, wrestling and being pinned down by your sort of opponent, your philosophical opponent. And if you haven't watched the first podcast that I did on this, you could go back and watch that. But how these people who are trying to achieve these transcendent states are often, very disciplined in some sport. And then they move into talking about Jimi Hendrix and how his music is transcendent. But if you know the Republic, if you know the dialogue that Socrates is engaged with his interlocutors, the people that are participating in the Dai-logos, Socrates says that education, the thing that informs us and enlightens us, brings wisdom, is one of the things that allows us to access the sort of the greatest good, get out of the cave. Education is gymnastic, which is wrestling, and music, which is Jimi Hendrix. And their conversation, their dialogue, brought them to that place. It's not like they had notes. It's not like they sat down and go, oh, let's follow Socrates and his, she brought up Socrates and Plato a lot, but it's not like they were trying to follow the notes from the Republic or something like that. Their conversation naturally went from wrestling to Jimi Hendrix. And why? Why is that? Because there is some transcendency to this. The human spirit, maybe God's Holy Spirit, maybe some other spirit. You can decide on that. Let me know what you think. But anyway, this was a nice little interlude before we get back into the rest of this conversation. And I do apologize for the little ADD moment that I had. If you are more type A and linear thinker, I know, I'm sorry, that was a struggle, but I thought that was just so funny that as we're talking about worship, a bright beam of light comes into my room.
He streamed sacred information through his music, and he knew he did. He called it his electric church.
Yeah.
So he knew he did that, and how incredible. And yes, we can hear it. And I think probably part of the reason I felt that when I listened to his music, and I somehow put that into that picture, that drawing that I made, and it was a beautiful experience. And that was, it sounds so strange, but that's part of the reason why I was interested in studying religion and things like that, because of that experience.
Yeah, that you're tapping into something that's higher than normal consciousness.
Yes, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's exactly what Plato said it was. It's you do it for its own sake. You don't do it for anything else. You do it because of it. You don't do it because after this I'm going to make up a lot of money, or after this it'll make my parents happy, or after. You don't do it for those reasons. You do it for in and of itself.
Well, the people that I know that do it for those reasons, I'm going to be famous, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that, they never make it. There's something about it. They just don't. They just don't. Maybe some of them will become pop stars. Like someone will plug them into the right songwriter and the right producer, and they'll figure it out. But it'll never be transcendent. It might be catchy. It might be okay. But it's not Hendrix.
Okay. Yeah. So if you do, in the context of music, art, it's really interesting that she's talking about how her experience listening to Jimi Hendrix's music, that it streamed sacred information, as she called it, and that compelled her to create her own art. I find really interesting. There's this sense that it moves you. Plato's three parts of the soul. There's the noetic, the mind. There's the spirited. That's where music kind of comes in, and courage and and then there's this appetitive nature, the embodied nature, the appetites, the drive. And that's really, that is really what the whole conversation around Transcend, like the music helps you go through that process of, I understand it. I've received the information, but it's more than just information. It's touched my soul. And then it's more than that. Now I have to go do something. I have to live it out. And that's what compelled her into religious studies. I thought that was really, really interesting. And then the idea that if you don't do that, if you don't engage in that process for the love of the thing itself, then it will never be transcendent. It will never move you into the ability to ascend or transcend whatever thing has us. Now they're going to go into Plato's cave. And so this idea that we're trapped in this cave, we're limited, we don't see the full sunshine, and that there are musicians who might be successful, quote unquote successful, in that they have a catchy song that makes them a lot of money or makes them popular, but that's not transcendence. That's like a beautiful idea, that if you're stuck in the cave and you look around and there's this pop star with all kinds of money and that gets really popular, you think, oh, that person has transcended. No. Wealth, money, fame, success. This is why, a lot of like gold medal Olympians, they achieve their goal, and then it's like, what? Then what? Because the winning a gold medal is not enough to bring you into the realm of like the true, the good, and the beautiful, borrowing from Socrates and Plato, into the heavenly realm, sort of borrowing from the biblical sort of cosmology of God's heavenly kingdom. It's not enough. You need something more powerful even than music. Music is a clue that that's possible, but even the music, as transcendent as it might be, is not enough. You need like a more powerful kind of music, or a more powerful kind of poetry.
There, that kind of what we like to call genius. Like what is that? But it's not. I mean, clearly it's him. He's a vessel. He's a receiver, an antenna, whatever he is. But
isn't help me out here, because I might be getting this wrong. So maybe somebody can look it up. But in the Republic, doesn't Socrates talk about his genius, and doesn't he talk about it as being sort of embodied, like a spirit? And then again, looking at this as I do through a Christian worldview, isn't that divine revelation, God's revelation, that genius, I don't know. I'm trying to connect something there, and maybe you guys can help me out. But I believe Plato did talk about his genius as an entity, as a spirit. Anyway.
But he's getting something from a higher state.
No doubt.
And the wildest thing what I always want to tell people about Hendrix and a lot of the particularly impactful people from the 1960s is that you have to understand how different the 60s were from the 50s. Like, the difference between 2014 and 2024 is nil. There's very little difference other than the ubiquitous technology, AI, things that are much more powerful than they ever were before, the impact of social media. But there was an impact of social media even 10 years ago, right? There's something about the 60s that were very different than the 50s. And I connect it to psychedelic use. Because all of those people were doing psychedelics, all of them, all those transcendent people, all the Beatles, when the Beatles, from their early days to the psychedelic days, it was like a completely different band, like completely different style of music.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Completely different impact. There was something about it. What had happened in the 1960s was a stunning revolution in culture.
And then the question is, did that revolution continue? Did it progress? Did it fail? Did it succeed? Where are we today? How powerful was this moment in history? Was it strong enough to liberate us?
Figured, well, this is the best way to just make everything. It's obviously these people are doing acid and ruining our country. Let's make everything illegal. And then Tom O'Neill's book Chaos.
Yeah.
Have you ever read that?
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah, I know.
It's insane
It's
because
so-
Tom is so detail oriented. I mean, he's so crazy that he studied this one thing for 20 years, and really kind of tanked his life, and then finally got the book out there, and the book is just holy shit. Because it's what the facts, the absolute undeniable facts in that book, just those alone, forget speculation, forget theory, just the facts alone are insane.
Yes.
They most likely created Charles Manson, most likely gave him psychedelics, gave him LSD, taught him how to mind control influential young people or easily influenced young people and get them to do horrific things and demonize the hippie movement.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, like what's going on right now.
That's exactly what I think.
I don't think they're as good right now. I think right now they're baffled by this thing called the internet. And I think the internet threw a giant monkey wrench in propaganda because it made people so much more resistant to bullshit.
Yes.
I think that's a great point because we're going to move into the cave. And people in the cave are looking at images. Oh, I lost it. The idea that Socrates proposes is that there are people sort of chained, they're bound, and all they're seeing is images. And the idea that Joe and Diana are working out is, sort of who's controlling the narrative type of idea, and is the internet a place that's making it harder for people to sort of buy this charade that what they're being shown is the real thing.
Is like bizarre, ego-driven, narrative-driven lies and propaganda and just nonsense that's supposed to make it look like they're doing the right thing always.
Yeah, that's a terrible idea of justice.
Yes.
But it's the appearance of justice.
Yeah.
Without actually doing the right thing.
Yeah, and it's just it's also it's got all the aspects of a cult. All the people that go along with it, no matter what the evidence shows, the people that aren't like stepping back and going, wait a minute, we are being run by people that have zero feelings for the actual populace.
And is it because people started to feel it that there was a shock to the system? And that's the idea. The people that are chained and bound in the analogy of the cave don't know they're chained and bound. Like they don't know because this is all they've ever known. They accept the reality that they have been given, and if there is a shock, what could awaken these people out of this? And this is the only reality that they've ever known. It's what they accept. They will fight you if you try to adjust that reality, and that's sort of Joe's point that people react as though they're sort of in this cult. They're ideologically committed to this thing that's in front of them. Why? Because they were told that that's the thing that's in front of them that they need to be looking at. And to be freed from that is kind of scary, because then the question is, well, what else is there? You're sort of cast into this unknown world. Now, if for those of you who are watching, you could see that it's a beautiful world. But for people that are bound and chained and that's all they've ever known, and they're sort of ideologically sort of stuck in this narrow vision of reality, they will fight. Like, they will fight to convince you that they're not chained and bound and that what they see is the real thing.
Trying to do is feed this machine that's got them to where they are in the first place.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's terrible, and it as it moves forward, it creates the need for resistance, and it creates that's what I've always thought about evil and negative things in the first place. Like, they are necessary because they motivate change and they motivate evolution. They motivate expression of disdain, of people that are completely displeased, people that are very upset with the way things are. They know this is the wrong way.
Yeah.
And it motivates the zeitgeist to move into a different direction, which I think is happening.
I hear that. This was actually a comment from a student, the exact same comment that you just said, is that, there's this structural evil, right? There's this evil. And it actually does some good in the sense that it motivates people to transform.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. This is, it's so interesting that Joe is able to come to this conclusion. Not many people are able to say what Joe said. Now, I think him and I are going to disagree slightly on how we get there, but is there some good in evil? And if so, how is that even possible? Augustine said that God is good and God is powerful. He is good enough and powerful enough to transform evil into good. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of looking at the problem of evil and it sort of draws them away from God. Other people look at the problem of evil and it draws them to God. And as a Christian, I've thought long and hard about the problem of evil. As Christians, we wrestle with this. We wrestle with this a lot. We wrestle with this in a deep and I think meaningful way. I do think God is good. I am aware of evil in this world, profound evil in this world. And yet God is using the evil in this world to transform it into good. Now, how can I say that? And does that help the person who's struggling through evil? I don't know, but I go to this passage in Hebrews 5, and the idea is that Jesus, as the great high priest, he's well acquainted with our suffering. This is the greatest injustice, was that the innocent man, Jesus, who is divine, he is God, he's fully God, fully man. He lived the perfect life. He fully balanced along the line of the golden mean between excess and deficiency. He's without sin. Though he was tempted in every single way that you and I are tempted. He was tempted with the temptations of every single human who would ever exist for all of time, and yet lived a perfect and holy life, obedient to his Father, and yet was convicted, wrongly tried, and wrongly murdered. Wrongly murdered. He was wrongly put to death, which was murder. So God is acquainted with our challenge with evil. And it says, though he is a son, he learned obedience through the things which he suffered. This passage blows my mind because we're talking about Jesus, who is God. The Trinitarian monotheism is a fun road to go down for a different podcast, for a different day. But the idea that he learned through the things that he suffered, that he looked upon the future. If there's any way for this cup to pass over me, let that be, but not my will, but your will be done. He says he'll drink the cup of death, if in obedience to the Father. So he sees it, and he embraces it, and he lays his life down, even though it is the greatest moment of injustice humanity has ever seen. It is the greatest moment of pain any human has ever endured. It's also the greatest act of love that has ever been displayed in human history. And so we wrestle with that. We wrestle with that in a deep, deep way. But I think the encouragement there is he has entered in to our story as the hero of the story. He is very familiar with this. And I think that though some people are come into conflict, or they brush up against the problem of evil, and it dissuades them from believing in an all good and all powerful God, I don't know what other options we have, because evil is real, and it can either find its meaning in the person of God, in the person of Jesus, who has the ability to transform it to some good, or it's just left as being evil. And that is probably even more evil, right? Is that if it's just evil and there's no hope and there's no transformation, then sort of evil wins in that story. And I prefer the story of Jesus.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you. And I'm at the same point. So through my looking at the UFO phenomenon, and, I knew all of this. I grew up in Northern California. There were the grove, I can't think of the name. It's right above where I live, the Bohemian Grove. And, so I kind of already had an idea of this kind of thing, of the group, the cult, as you call it.
Yeah.
All right. And it's easy to see. Well, for those who can see it, it's easy to see. Some people don't want to see it.
Right.
Okay. So once you see it, you're like, okay. But then to live it, this is what I felt like happened to me. So in 2012, after I started the study of UFOs, I recognized that the management of that message of the UFO for the American public had been organized not just from the 1940s, but really from earlier, from early 20th century. And once I started to recognize and even meet the people who were responsible for managing this in a very cohesive, tight way, very specific, that's when I recognized that it was that, I felt it. I guess that's the difference, was that before I just saw it on the sideline, like we talk about it now, you and I, and it looks like we're talking about it from the sideline. We're saying, yeah, this is really bad, what they're doing and stuff. But I was part of it. I saw it. I know those people. They talked to me about it. They talked to me about why they were doing it. And they said, Diana, you don't want to help these people. They would kill you if you had something that they wanted. Like, these are not good people, is what they were saying about
these people specifically.
The general population. They were talking about the general population.
The general population would kill you.
That's what they were saying. They were saying that these people only do good because they have to do good. They are actually bad. And so
these people only do good because they have to do good, and they're actually bad. Who's she talking about? She's talking about, okay, so in Plato's, in the analogy of the cave, brought to you through Socrates as Plato is writing it. And this is, for if you're listening just on the podcast, we're looking at a picture, a drawing of what Plato's cave, Socrates' cave. I keep saying Plato. I mean, again, I kind of think that Plato was the guy. Socrates was his character, though I think Socrates is still a historical person. Okay. What is presented is, people chained and bound. They can't see behind them. They can only see forward. And what they see is the images, the shadows on the cave, the shadows of the images. Now, the people behind the cave, behind the wall in the cave, who they can't be seen by the slaves, basically. That's who she's talking about. The people presenting the images to the general population, the people holding the images. Now, what's also interesting is that in the Republic, Socrates proposes another sort of analogy. It's called a noble lie. And it's the lie that there are some people born with golden souls and that there are some people born with silver souls, and that there's a third class of people born of lesser metals, bronze. So there's these bronze-souled people. And so what Diana is saying is that these people who are presenting the images and presenting the idea, and they're talking about the UFO phenomenon, the ones sort of controlling the narrative, so to speak, are saying that you don't really want to share your thoughts with these people that are bound and chained. They're the bronze-souled people. They're the lesser metals. They don't do good because they are good. They only do good because they have to do good. So in a way, they're just motivated by impulse or desire, like beasts, if you will. That would be kind of like how that analogy unpacks, and you can really see it working out today. Again, is this one of those things that's a shock to the system corporately, as sort of humanity in general? As we zoom out using podcasts and digital media, we're looking at the soul of humanity that's built up of a bunch of the parts. And is that being shocked by something? And are we becoming aware that this game is happening, that there's a cave and there's shadows, and the shadows are just the shadows of the images, but the images are not even the thing in and of itself. Again, going back to what's the thing that motivates you to ascend out of the cave? Is it the love of the thing itself? And we'll get to that thing here in a second. But I just thought that was interesting. She was sort of confronted by a group of people saying, sort of in a way, we know better, and don't mess with the general population because they're not good people.
Argument I was getting. So it caused me to eject these people from my life, for one, but also to do, to understand more deeply. And believe me, I've already thought a lot about the problem of evil. I spend my life reading about it and doing, talking about it with people, and, what can we do? I recognize we can't do anything except work on ourselves. And that's where I had to reread some of those texts, like the Plato text that I talked about. He talks about your idea of evil, that, perhaps, or he calls it injustice. And he says that perhaps people are unjust just because, there needs to be injustice for other people to recognize it and then to do this thing. How do we create a just society? That's his question.
Right.
And I don't think so he doesn't actually answer that question with words, but he does it through giving stories. And one of the stories is the allegory of the cave, where, the allegory, it's like the Matrix, right? It's like, where people they're being tied up and there's puppeteers who are showing them these shadows on the wall, and they take that for reality. But somehow some person gets out and they see, well, what he's talking about is this mystical tradition that you and I've talked about early when we started talking. We talked about, if we do those things that we love and we're carried away and we become, you said it was obsessed, you're obsessed with it. And I call it doing it because it's pretty awesome, right? That's my word for it.
Yeah.
When you do that, justice happens. You're not worried about, so it's almost like an emergent phenomena from these communities that do it. And they're small communities. So there is structural injustice and there's structural evil. And it doesn't seem like we can fight. That's what I learned from doing the UFO. I learned that there were these things, UFOs, but more intensely and more personally, I learned that the government was doing this, and that's what was upsetting to me most.
So,
okay, so she says a lot there, and we'll land the plane here with this. Okay, so I think one of the mistakes that people make is the idea that you can get out of the cave on your own, that humanity, beginning from oneself, can just do these protocols, these disciplines, these whatever, and somehow become aware that you are chained and bound, and the only thing you see is the shadows of the images of the thing itself. And there's just no way. And I think Socrates even kind of alludes to this, because he says, if there could be some way that someone could turn their head, and it's like, if there could be some way for someone to turn, How is there a way? And this is where I come full speed in with my Christian worldview. There is no way except for someone descending down into the cave to liberate the people who are in bondage. And this is what makes this so beautiful. It's like, again, Jesus is God-man, perfect. He's not bound. He is not stuck in this illusion that we have. And so he can be the one that comes and frees these people. Now, again, some of these people fight. Some of these people killed Jesus, but joke's on them. He knows the way out of the grave. So he can descend into the cave. He can rescue these people. And then what? And then the protocols come in. Then the spiritual discipline comes in, because what do? He leads you out of the cave. Jesus is the only one who can lead you out of the cave. And you come out of this cave, and in the way Socrates describes it is up here, and out of the cave you have the vision of the true, the good, and the beautiful, this beatific vision. It shows up elsewhere in other literature. You could think of the Divine Comedy. That's the journey up into the heavenly realm. And then what? What do you behold? What do you behold in that beatific vision? Well, you behold the glory of God. And when you behold it, you are transformed by it. So we look upon the person of Jesus and we remember his sacrifice, that he, though he his home is in heaven, he descended in an act of self-sacrifice. He gave of himself to free people so that those people could find a way out. That's ascendant, transcendent, up and out. We need to get up. We need to move heavenward and then be freed and let out. Okay. And then this is you. You're up here and you're beholding this vision, and it transforms you. And then you realize, I need to be like Jesus, and I need to go down into the cave, and I need to, if I can, rescue these people, even if that means sacrificing myself, which is what they were talking about earlier. You don't do the thing for your own aggrandizement or your own pleasure. You do it for the love of the thing itself. And so you become a person capable of self-sacrifice, not because you're great and noble, but because of love. We love because he first loved us, and we see that love, and then we begin to love others, not because we're loving people, but because it's a gift that he has bestowed upon us, that we can go into this dark world. And it is a dark world. And that's where the question of evil comes in. And that's where the question of lies and deception come in. And how do we, and I'm speaking maybe now to people who have put their faith and trust in Jesus, and how do we as followers of Jesus navigate this dark world? I mean, we have the light. He hasn't left us like orphans. Oh man. And he sort of passes this on to us. Although he's a son, he learned obedience for the things which he suffered. And we descend, and we go into the darkness, and we suffer, and we learn. What do we learn? Obedience. What is obedience? Obedience actually takes us back into the idea of music, which takes us back into the place of worship. Obedience is harmony with God. That's music. That's worship. What is the chief end of man? To worship God and enjoy him forever. And then we pass that on. And so the people who are in darkness have seen a great light. and they love even the possibility of that freedom, the ability to worship. And actually, that's what's so beautiful, isn't it? Is that the worship allows you to be free, even right here, even though you might be chained and bound and forced to look at these images. You're already free if you can be a true worshiper of Christ. And I think that does liberate you. I think that has a very practical way of liberating you, and you realize these shadows. Why would I be content to look at the shadow of the thing when I have been apprehended by the most beautiful thing, the most beautiful person there ever is? I've come back into harmony with my Creator, and so the images no longer satisfy us. I don't become full circle. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desire. This transformed desire allows you to look at this shadow and realize, this doesn't satisfy. This doesn't satisfy me. This is a lie. This is deception. I'm aware of the deception now. I look around and I go, why am I content with this bondage? Why am I content to sit here and look at the shadow? Why don't I turn and look at the image of the thing? Well, the image of the thing isn't even the thing itself. I need to get up and out. It's transformation. This is the transformation that Joe and Diana are talking about. It's the ascendancy and the transcendency is only possible because transformation is possible. And you can think of 1 John 3:2, 2:3. It's one of those. Little children, what we are has not yet been revealed, but we know when we see Him, we will be like Him. We see Him, we will be like Him. When we behold Him, the act of beholding His glory is transformative and allows us to be like Him, sacrifice ourselves, no longer live for ourselves, and then engage in the freeing of other people. And I think that's, again, where those protocols and those spiritual disciplines come in, not for the sake of yourself, but it's for the sake of what God has made you for, the good works that He has prepared beforehand, that you might walk in them. That's freedom. That's freedom. All right. Well, I'm going to end transmission here, and I will catch you in the next one.